You know, when you bury a time capsule, there is this implicit expectation of like objective preservation.
Right. Yeah. Like you're capturing history.
Exactly. You back away a pristine daily newspaper, maybe, a perfectly minted coin or a popular toy that's still in the shrink wrap.
A completely clean snapshot of an era.
Yeah, you assume whoever digs it up is going to get this perfectly categorized look at history. Culture presented as a fixed, visible object you can just, point to and understand.
Uh-huh.
But imagine you dig up that time capsule 50 years later, and instead of a crisp newspaper and a shiny coin, you find this incredibly battered, deeply personal, 10,000-word handwritten diary entry.
Oh, wow.
Right. And it's just this one person ranting with absolute burning passion about like a local garage band that only ever played 3 shows.
That completely shatters the objective lens.
Totally. Suddenly, you aren't looking at the culture itself anymore. You are looking at the intensely subjective reflection of that culture through a single human mind. And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today.
It really is, because, that scenario is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. It forces you to realize that media history isn't just a ledger of what was broadcast. It's a record of how it was received.
Exactly.
And we have this fascinating, just incredible translated transcript from an Israeli YouTube channel called Cartoonum.
Right.
And on the surface, the video is titled as a simple countdown, right? It's just the creator's top 10 favorite animated...
Which sounds like every other listicle on the internet.
Exactly. But underneath that very standard format, it is this profound, almost forensic window into the psychology of global fandom.
Yeah, it really is.
You see the incredible, sometimes bizarre impact of localized media and the intense, life-altering parasocial relationships viewers build with fictional characters.
We also pulled a brief excerpt from a Hebrew media pronunciation guide that the creator references, which honestly serves as the perfect primer for this whole phenomenon.
Oh, that guide is so telling.
Right. The guide explicitly notes the inherent, sometimes insurmountable challenge of pronouncing character and series names when media crosses vast language barriers.
Because the phonetic structure of Japanese doesn't map neatly onto Hebrew.
No, not at all. Just as it doesn't map neatly onto English, when you force a piece of art through that linguistic sieve, things are altered.
Absolutely.
So, for everyone listening with us today, we're going to explore how art is translated, not just the literal word, but the cultural intent.
Yeah, how fans end up claiming literal ownership over these localized narratives.
Exactly, to the point where the ending of a television show can quite literally feel like a death in the family. So let's unpack this.
We really have to start at the foundational layer of this fans' media consumption, which is heavily characterized by a massive resistance to modern iteration.
Yeah, they really do not like new things.
Not at all. Starting at the bottom of their list, we have Tenkai Knights at number 10, Beat 'em and Crossfire, and its sequel Fire Blast at 9, and the original Bakugan at number 6. And the creator expresses this deep, simmering frustration with canceled shows. Like, they are still actively lamenting that Tenkai Knights never got a second season back in 20...
Wow, holding a grudge for a decade.
Yeah. But that frustration turns into absolute disdain when it comes to modern reboots. They specifically target Spin Master's brand new Bakugan reboot, just completely dismissing it as terrible compared to these...
Which, brings up one of the most fascinating historical anomalies of the animation industry.
Oh, the Bakugan origin story.
Yes. The creator notes that the first season of the original Bakugan was actually considered a total commercial failure in its home country of Japan.
It was dead in the water.
Completely.
Yeah.
The ratings weren't there. The toy sales weren't there. It was only saved from total obscurity because North American companies bought the rights, localized it, heavily marketed it in the West, and turned it into this massive multi-million-dollar global phenomenon.
The economics behind that flip are just staggering because, in the late 2000s, the Japanese market was incredibly oversaturated. Monster battling and, toy tie-in properties.
Oh, yeah. Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!
Right. Duel Masters, Digimon. Bakugan was trying to carve out market share in a demographic that was already spending elsewhere.
It just couldn't compete.
Exactly. But the North American market had a vacuum. The Beyblade craze had cooled down a few years prior, and Western syndicators were desperate for a new, cool toy game hybrid that could replicate that inner access.
Right, they needed the next big playground craze.
Yeah. So Spin Master and Nelvana saw the underlying mechanics of the magnetic marbles popping open and realized it was the perfect tactile for Western kids.
And it worked beautifully.
It did. The show's survival and its entire ongoing narrative dictated entirely by Western toys rather than the tail wag the dog.
But, I wonder, looking at the YouTubers' visceral reaction to the new Bakugan, if they're simply experiencing a fossilization of their own palate.
How do you mean?
Like, you go back to your favorite childhood diner, And the mac and cheese tastes different. So you blame the new chef and say the recipe is ruined. But the recipe hasn't changed. Your palate changed. You grew up.
Oh, that's
right. When this fan rejects the new Bakugan and pines for the canceled 2015 era of Tenkai Knights, they aren't merely critiquing modern animation techniques. They are implicitly stating, like, the person I was when I watched that old animation was happier.
Yeah, fans fall in love with the era in which they consumed the media.
Exactly. The feeling of coming home from school, dropping the backpack, and turning on the TV. The new show, regardless of its objective quality, cannot recreate the neurological baseline of being 12 years old.
And you can really see that fossilization in how seriously they treat the lore of that specific era. I mean, what's fascinating here is they go into incredible detail about B-Daman.
Oh, the deep lore of B-Daman.
Yeah. They mention a fun linguistic trivia point, that B-Daman comes from the Japanese word for marble. But then they dive into the plot, utter reverence.
Right, like it's high literature.
Exactly. They detail the main character, Kamon, suffering from amnesia, and how his brother Roma becomes the villainous B-Master, physically controlled by his double B-Daman named Stallion.
It's so intense.
It is. To a casual observer, this is just a 22-minute commercial for shooting marbles out of plastic robot's stomach.
Right.
But to this fan, at that formative age, it carried the emotional weight of a Shakespearean tragedy. The literal stakes of the universe rest on
And when you view it through that lens, it makes complete sense why any deviation from that original formula feels like a personal insult to their history.
Absolutely.
But it's not just the narrative lore they are fiercely protecting. It is the literal, physical, auditory experience.
Yeah.
The localized voice.
Oh, their opinions on dubbing are so intense.
Yeah, the creator holds some incredibly rigid opinions on dubbing. They flat out claim that Japanese dubs, the original native audio for these shows, are often, quote, terrible.
Which is such a hot take in the anime.
It really is. They lavish praise on the Hebrew dubs of Bakugan and Inazuma 11, stating that when they watch the Hebrew version, it feels like the characters were created with this voice.
And that statement fundamentally redefines the role of a localization because they are no longer just translating a script.
Right, they're doing much more than...
Yeah, they're rewriting the cultural and emotional DNA of the show, and sometimes that rewriting introduces bizarre narrative friction.
Oh, like with Inazuma 11.
Exactly. For Inazuma 11, which sits at number 2 on their list, the localization team made a seemingly minor but highly disruptive change.
The middle school thing.
Yeah. They inexplicably translated Raymond Middle School as a high school, despite the characters clearly being depicted and written as 8th graders.
Which is a huge jump in maturity.
Right. The YouTuber talks about how deeply confusing this was for them, wondering if the Japanese educational system lacked middle tier, or if kids simply started high school at a younger age.
You can trace that exact type of localization decision back to Western broadcasting theories of the 90s and early 2000s.
Oh, the aspirational viewing concept.
Yeah. Localizers often believe that kids preferred to watch characters who were slightly older than. So if your target demographic is 10-year-old, you make the characters 14.
Right.
If your target is 14, you make them high schoolers. The localization team likely thought Israeli kids would find high schoolers cooler, completely disregarding the fact that the visual language and emotional maturity of the characters were rigidly designed for middle schoolers.
It completely distorts the viewer's understanding of the stakes.
It really does.
It also highlights the immense pressure placed on the localized voice actors to carry that altered narrative. The creator specifically names a Hebrew voice actor, Asaf Avidan, praising him as the defining element of the show.
He did a ton of voices, right?
Did. Avidan voiced the Pharaoh, Mokuba, and Rex Raptor in the original, and the lead, Jaden Yuki, in Yu.
That's a lot of range.
Yeah, and the creator practically begs him to return to the voice acting industry, suggesting that the characters simply do not exist without his specific vocal timbre. The localizer didn't just translate the art. For this fan, the localizer became the primary.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because this leads to a massive contradiction in how this fan views censorship.
Oh, the 4Kids debate.
Yeah. They launch into a fierce criticism of Western censorship, specifically targeting 4Kids Entertainment and their handling of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, which is their #1 pick.
They really tear into 4Kids.
They despise how 4Kids changed character name, painted over scenes deemed too violent, and completely erased the original Japanese orchestral score to insert upbeat Western rock music. They view this as a butchering of the art form to create a sanitized kids show.
Which, to be fair, is a standard critique among anime purists. 4Kids operated under very strict American broadcast standards and practice.
Right, the Saturday morning cartoon rule.
Exactly. To get a show syndicated on Saturday morning television in the United States in the early 2000s, you couldn't show realistic firearms.
They replaced them with invisible guns, or water guns.
Yeah. You couldn't have explicit death, and religious iconography had to be completely scrubbed. They weren't censoring for the sake of it. They were adapting the product to survive the regulatory environment of American network television.
But the YouTuber stance on this falls apart when they discuss a specific villain from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX named Yubel.
Such a fascinating paradox.
It really is. In the original Japanese version, Yubel's gender presentation is entirely dualistic. They are presented as both male and female, and the creators made the fascinating artistic choice to have Yubel speak with overlapping male and female voice tracks simultaneously.
It's an unsettling, highly unique audit.
Right. But 4Kids, adhering to their rigid serialization standards, completely remove that dual presentation, giving Yubel a strictly female-only voice and presentation.
And the creator admits they actually prefer the 4Kids censored version.
Yes, they violently hate the 4Kids censorship of the music and the names, but they actively prefer the censored version of Yubel because they found the original Japanese dual voice concept to be too creepy and frightening.
Wow.
It is the ultimate consumer paradox. You demand an authentic, traditional foreign dish. You yell at the chef for altering the recipe for a Western palate. But when the dish arrives, you take one bite, declare it way too spicy, and ask them to wash the spices off.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right. They want the aesthetic of the unadulterated creator's vision, but they require the emotional safety of the sanitized version.
It perfectly illustrates that fans don't actually want objective purity in their media. They want the version of the media that aligns with their specific comfort zone.
Yeah, I got it.
They want the mature themes of a high-stakes card game, but they don't want to actually experience genuine fear when the villain appears. And this selective desire for control extends far beyond localization and sense. As you move through the creators list, you see a desperate need to control the physical world building and the narrative architecture of the shows themselves.
You see this heavily in their preference for rigidly structured magic systems. They express a deep love for elemental nature systems, fire, earth, light, water, specifically praising this in Bakugan in their number 4 pick. Beyblade, Metal Saga.
There is a comfort in a categorized, predictable universe.
Exactly. But they express an intense, visceral dislike for the setting of The Legend of Korra, which comes in at number 5.
Ah, yes, the industrialization debate.
Yeah, Korra, as the sequel to Avatar, The Last Airbender took a purely mythological, ancient fantasy world and leaped forward several decades into Republic City, which is this 1920s steampunk industrialized urban.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the industrialization of a fantasy setting often breaks the psychological contract a creator has with their audience.
How's
Well, when a fan invests thousands of hours memorizing the lore, the geography, and the spiritual rules of a pristine fantasy world, they feel a sense of ownership.
like they're a shareholder.
Yeah, they are shareholders in that fictional economy, moving the timeline forward and introducing cars, radios, and political bureaucracy feels like a breach of contract. It shatters the escapism.
So the fan feels entitled to the stasis of the world. And that entitlement bleeds directly into how they view the plot itself.
Right, the alternate endings.
Yes, the creator constantly wishes for alternate endings and massive point of view shift. They absolutely loathe Season 4 of Beyblade and explicitly state they wish they could rewrite the entire season to be told from the POV of a side character, Ryuga, after he loses to the villain Nemesis.
Just completely changing the protagonist.
Yeah, and for Inazuma 11, they claim the finale would have been the second greatest television ending in history if only they could physically delete the final epilogue.
The time skip.
Right, there is a time skip where Arian, the protagonist of the sequel series, arrives 10 years later. The fan hates this glimpse into the future so much they wish it excised from canon.
They're essentially advocating for the privatization of art.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, the creator proposes a world where television shows are forced to release official alternate endings, much like a DVD deleted scene, allowing the viewer to effectively choose their own preferred canon. They want an interactive sandbox rather than a shared cultural narrative.
Which, fundamentally misunderstands the purpose of storytelling. A story is a vehicle driven by the author. The fan is a passenger.
Right.
It's like being a backseat driver on a cross-country road trip. The author is driving the car through the mountains, and the fan loves the scenery. But when the author steers the car toward a bustling city, the fan starts screaming from the back seat, demanding they turn around.
That's exactly what this is.
You are in the back seat. You don't have the steering. If you demand a choose-your-own-adventure ending for every piece of media, we are no longer watching the same show. We lose the shared cultural experience that allows us to discuss and debate the art in the first place.
And that debate reaches an absolute boiling point when it comes to romantic relationships in media. If fans are protective of world building, they are fiercely, almost aggressively protective of how characters interact.
Oh, yeah. This is a huge part of the source.
Looking at the creator's commentary on the finale of The Legend of Korra, we see a complete rejection of the author's stated intent.
Now, we have to look at the architecture of the fam's argument here impartially, because it is a fascinating case study in text.
Absolutely.
The creator goes on a passionate rant regarding the final moments of Korra, strongly rejecting the idea that the two female leads, Korra and Asami, end the series as a romantic couple.
And they base this entirely on the text, right?
Yes, on a very strict literal reading of the broadcasted text. They point out that both characters previously dated a male character, Meiko. In the final scene, Korra and Asami are only shown holding hands and walking into a spirit portal together.
Right.
The creator notes they never kissed on screen, and they never explicitly acted like a traditional romantic couple during the show's broadcast run.
The crucial mechanism of their argument here is the complete rejection of external validation. Because after the finale aired, the creators of the show publicly confirmed that Korra and Asami were a romantic couple, which was later explored in official tie-in comics.
But the YouTuber doesn't accept that.
Not at all. The YouTuber explicitly states that external creator confirmation does not count. To this fan, if the explicit romantic confirmation is not animated on the screen during the runtime of the television show, it is mathematically not canon.
It is the show don't tell doctrine taken to its absolute militant extreme. They are demanding a specific evidentiary standard. And they broaden this to critique modern fandom culture entirely, complaining about the tendency to assume any two characters who interact meaningfully are a romantic couple.
The shipping culture.
Exactly. They argue that characters should be allowed to be platonic friends, and they push back against what they perceive as the glorification of LGBTQ+ relationships in media. They argue that it is statistically unrealistic for Korra, Asami, and another character, Kaya, to all be queer within the same narrative universe based on real-world demographics.
Which introduces a highly specific cultural hierarchy to their media. They explicitly state that in action-adventure shows, the adventure is the main core. Romance is a side dish.
A side dish, yeah.
And if you are going to serve a side dish, it must be clearly labeled on the menu. But this ignores the reality of television production, especially around 2014 when Korra ended.
Right, because of network constraints.
Exactly. Creators often had to rely heavily on subtext because network broadcast standards and cultural friction prevented them from displaying explicit textual evidence of certain...
Where is the line between subtext and text, really?
Yeah.
It brings up the classic literary theory of the death of the author.
Oh, for sure.
Once a piece of art is released, does the author's tweet about what a scene meant hold any actual weight?
That's the million-dollar question.
Let's look at it like a classic mystery novel. The author leaves a meticulously crafted trail of breadcrumbs pointing to the butler. But on the final page, they never explicitly write the sentence, "The butler did it."
The detective just gives the butler a knowing look.
Exactly. So is the reader wrong to deduce the butler is the killer? Or is the author wrong for not stating it in bold text? If you operate strictly on the textual evidence the YouTuber demands, the mystery remains unsolved. If you accept the subtext, the narrative is complete.
It proves that media consumption is entirely... Two people can watch the exact same sequence of animated frames. One sees a carefully constructed romantic buildup woven into the subtext. The other, requiring different narrative cues, sees a purely platonic friendship.
The text on the screen and the fan's interpretation are in a constant tug of war.
Always. But, it's interesting to see where that friction completely disappears on this list. Right in the middle of these intense, plot-heavy, highly debated anime, you have a jarring shift into pure Western slap.
So what does this all mean? We go from spiky-haired anime protagonists saving the world with magic marbles to, well, coming in at number 7 is Codename Kids Next Door, and at number 3 is Ed and Eddie.
These are massive outliers.
They really are. We go to 3 kids scamming their neighbors for jawbreakers in a suburban cul-de-sac.
It's quite a tonal shift.
Yeah. The creator praises the diverse global cast of Kids Next Door, noting the mix of British, American, Japanese, Australian, and French and Black characters. They even dig deep into the lore, referencing the live-action adult interview movie Operation, ZERO.
They really know their stuff.
Oh, absolutely. But the broadcast history of Ed and Eddie in Israel is what truly stands out here.
It is a phenomenal broadcast anomaly. Ed and Eddie was aired on Israel's Arutz Hayelidim, which translates to the kids' channel, but it wasn't aired during the daytime blocks, and it wasn't dubbed into Hebrew. It was broadcast late at night in English with Hebrew subtitles.
Which is wild for a cartoon like that.
Right. The creator notes this was incredibly rare, as that late-night subtitled slot was strictly reserved for mature, scary, or violent program. They specifically mention the anime Inuyasha, which they say terrified them as a child, sharing that exact same time slot.
It is such a bizarre programming decision. Why was a show about three idiot kids making a cardboard spaceship treated like mature, late-night foreign cinema?
It makes no sense on paper.
Imagine turning on your TV at midnight, expecting a block of gritty, adult true crime documentaries, and suddenly there is a subtitle episode of Looney Tunes.
Right, the tonal whiplash is crazy.
The programming block creates a completely mismatched psychological expectation. It really highlights how haphazard international media licensing was in the early 2000s. Networks would buy package deals of content and just slop them into the schedule wherever they had dead air, regardless of tonal whiplash.
But the brilliance of that placement is that it proved the universality of visual content. The creator admits they did not understand enough English to read the subtitles or follow the rapid-fire dialogue of Ed, and Eddie.
Because they were too young.
Yeah, exactly. Yet, they still consider it one of the greatest shows ever made. They claim you don't need to understand a single word of English to find it absolutely hilarious.
Because physical comedy bypasses the linguistic processing center of the brain entirely.
Totally.
If an anime character delivers a 10-minute monologue about the rules of a card game and you don't speak the language, the narrative is impenetrable. But if a cartoon character gets hit in the face with a giant flying ironing board, the physics of that joke translate perfectly. Whether you are sitting in Ohio or Tel Aviv, slapstick is a global language.
And the creator actively mourns the loss of the Cartoon Network channel on Israeli cable providers like Yes and Hot, noting that this pipeline of Western comedy was effectively shut off.
That's a shame.
It is a stark reminder that media accessibility, like the literal infrastructure of what channels a local cable provider chooses to license, dictates what becomes culturally relevant to an entire generation of kids in a specific region.
The infrastructure shapes the comedy, but it's the dramatic, plot-heavy narratives that shape the emotional core of the viewer. Which brings us to the climax of this deep dive and the profound, almost alarming emotional impact media has on its consumers.
Yeah, the #1 pick.
The #1 show on the YouTubers list is Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, and the way they discuss the series finale is honestly staggering.
It's incredibly heavy.
They don't just say it was a bummer the show ended, they describe the conclusion as a severe, life-altering emotional trauma.
The transcript is incredibly raw. They explicitly state, quote, "Think about how it feels to lose a family member. That's how I felt when this series ended. I was in mourning for 5 years.
5 years.
5 years of genuine mourning for a localized television broadcast."
And that grief naturally metastasizes into anger toward the production realities of the animation industry. They lament that Studio Gallup, the animation studio responsible for the vast majority of the historical Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, no longer works on the modern iteration.
Right. They hate the new art styles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They claim the new animation is terrible, citing the beautiful character designs of older seasons. They specifically point out how good the protagonist Jaden Yuki looked in seasons 3 and 4 as the gold standard of art that can never be replicated.
This raises an important question about the psychology of Parasocial, specifically during formative adolescence.
Right, because they were pretty young.
The creator mentions they were 14 years old when at 14, the human brain is hyper-focused on forming identity, social structures, and emotional attachment.
That makes a lot of sense.
When you consume a long-running daily animated show, those characters become reliable constants. They are there every day after school. They don't judge you. They provide a structured emotional anchor. When the show ends, the disruption to that daily routine mimics the psychological stage. The brain processes the loss of the routine as the loss of a genuine relationship.
Is it healthy to mourn a cartoon, like a deceased relative? It feels less like a literal death and more like graduating from high school.
How do you mean?
When you graduate, you aren't just leaving a brick building. You are being forcibly evicted from a structured environment in a community you loved. You are mourning the end of an era of your own life, and the television show just happened to be the soundtrack to that era.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The true tragedy is the asymmetry of the parasocial relationship. The fan remains frozen in time, holding on to the emotion of that finale. But the animation industry is a business. It moves forward.
Yeah, life goes on.
Studios lose contracts, properties are sold, and voice actors grow up and move on to entirely different.
Which is exactly how the source text concludes. The YouTuber ends their video with a highly emotional, direct plea spoken into the camera to the voice actors.
It's very poignant.
They beg Asaf Avidan, who actually grew up to become a highly famous, internationally recognized musician, and Danny Avidan, who voiced the best friend character Cirrus, to return to the dubbing end. The fan feels this unbreakable personal connection to the vocal cords of these specific men, practically praying for a reunion.
A reunion that, given the realities of the actors' current careers and the shifting landscape of global localization, will almost certainly never happen.
Yeah, probably.
The fan is waiting at a station for a train that...
It is a heartbreaking testament to how powerful these translated, localized pieces of plastic and ink can be. We have covered massive ground today, unpacking this single Israeli YouTube video.
We really have.
We looked at the economics of localization, how a failure in Japan became a global hit due to North American syndication gaps. We explored the friction between authorial intent and fan entitlement, where fans want to rewrite endings and dictate romantic relationships based strictly on textual evidence.
The whole text versus subtext debate.
Exactly. We examined the boundary-breaking language of slapstick comedy with Ed and Eddie airing late at night with subtitles.
Yeah.
And we witnessed the profound parasocial grief of a fan waiting 5 years to process the finale of a card game end.
It highlights how incredibly complex our relationship, and it leaves us with a necessary questioner.
What's that?
Well, consider the shows, movies, or books that you loved the most as a child, the art that shaped your morality, your sense of humor, your worldview. Imagine if you had consumed them with entirely different voice actors. Imagine if the cultural translation had been handled by a different studio with different broadcast standards, or if the network had mandated a slightly different ending. Would those pieces of media still have impacted you the same way? Would they still have shaped the person you are today? Or is your very identity simply a byproduct of the specific, highly curated localizations you just happen to be fed at the exact right time in your life?
It really makes you wonder if that time capsule we talked about at the beginning isn't holding a record of the culture itself, but merely a record of the filter that culture was poured through. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the media you consume, keep wondering how it got to you, and we will be here to help you unpack.